Imagine this: a man in Athens, 2,500 years ago, refuses wine, eats dry bread, skips dinner, and then has the audacity to say he is happier than you. His name was Socrates. His empty stomach was not a tragedy, it was a weapon. The Greeks believed that true wisdom begins where the belly ends. They fasted, they drank watered-down wine, they trained children to stay hungry just to learn how to think. Sounds insane, maybe, but it gave birth to Western philosophy. Before we dive into this strange and forgotten world, where food was never just food, but a battlefield of ideas, hit that subscribe button if you enjoy uncovering the absurd truths of history. And tell me in the comments, where are you listening from? I find it fascinating that across time and continents, we're still sitting at the same table, just with very different menus. So grab your snacks, or don't, because the Greeks would definitely judge you. If today, a 70-year-old man were to wander barefoot through the winter night in Athens wearing a rough cloth garment, having eaten nothing all day, and then stopped in the middle of a marketplace to ask people, "Do you truly know what justice is?" he would most likely be taken to a mental institution. But 2,500 years ago, that man laid the foundation for all Western thought. His name was Socrates, and his empty stomach was not a sign of poverty, it was a philosophical instrument. In a world where every touch of a smartphone severs you from deep thought, the ancient Greeks, especially Socrates, chose the opposite path. They stripped away the comforts of life, fullness, convenience, red meat, soft chairs, to keep their minds sharp. Not because they were suffering, but because they believed that only in mild hunger, only in a state of deliberate lack, could reason truly function. One of his students recounted that Socrates often ate nothing all day. He walked, spoke, taught, and debated with an energy that even young men could not match. At night, he sat not to eat, but to continue asking, "What is the soul? Does justice exist if no one believes in it?" We often think one must be well-fed in order to think clearly. But the ancient Greeks seemed to discover the opposite. It is hunger when blood retreats from the stomach and rises to the brain that awakens the human mind. That night in the Agora, the central market of Athens, a group of young people gathered around Socrates. In the flickering light of oil lamps, there was no pizza, no energy drinks. They had only water and a few dried figs. But the conversation played out like a battle. Socrates turned to a strong young nobleman and asked, "If you do not know what is good, then what is the point of living with strength?" The young man was speechless, not from hunger, but because for the first time his illusion of knowledge had been stripped away. We live in an age where people can eat 5 meals a day and still feel empty. Socrates, on the other hand, fasted, walked, argued, and found fullness elsewhere in the pursuit of truth. His students recounted that once he stood in meditation for 24 hours without food, without drink, just to solve a problem in his mind. When he was done, he smiled, sat down, and still did not eat. We might call that madness, but to the ancient Greeks, he was not a fanatic. He was a philosophos, a lover of wisdom, and wisdom does not emerge from a full belly. A line in the Apologia Socrates' Apology reads, "I do not live to eat and drink, but eat and drink to live." But what is the purpose of living for him, it was to question. And eating was merely a means, never the end. The Greeks of that time had markets, bread, goat cheese, and diluted wine. So why did people like Socrates, the teacher of Plato, choose lives of austerity? The answer lies in a profound principle: only when the body is not steeped in satisfaction can the soul begin to long for something greater. A truth that we have perhaps forgotten today. Look at the great thinkers. They walked for hours, ate sparingly, drank in moderation, and thought deeply. Not because they enjoyed extremes, but because they understood an empty stomach makes room for a full mind. Modern science, perhaps by accident, is returning to that origin. Research shows that intermittent fasting improves memory and increases BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, a key element in learning and creativity. What Socrates did was not unconscious. It was a philosophy of life. On that quiet Athenian night, only the sound of his footsteps echoed among the stone columns. No one heard his stomach growl because no one cared. What made people stop was his question, a question that did not come from a banquet table but from the solitude of a soul undistracted by dessert. Tomorrow we will eat in haste again and forget to ask questions. But if in some quiet moment you feel empty not from lack of food, but from lack of thought, then perhaps Socrates is still there, walking beside you silently with an empty stomach and a question. Do you truly know what you are living for? Or are you merely eating to forget they called it a feast? But do not imagine a lavish banquet with roasted chicken, succulent lamb, and the noisy clinking of goblets. The symposium, one of the strangest cultural phenomena of ancient Athens, was not about eating. It was a ritual, a stage, a mental experiment, where wine knowledge and the soul collided. In the center of a wide stone-tiled room, men reclined on long couches, heads resting on their elbows, bodies draped in thin linen cloth. In front of them were not bowls of rice or trays of meat, but clay cups etched with mythological scenes, filled with red wine diluted as gently as morning mist. Beside them sat a lyre, a few slave girls humming softly, and at the heart of the gathering, a host known as the symposiarch, the one who held the power to decide who could speak, who must remain silent, and how much the wine should be diluted. The symposium was not meant for the gluttonous. Food, if it appeared at all, was offered with great restraint, merely to line the stomach: a few salted olives, some goat cheese, dry bread, perhaps a handful of dried figs. No one expected to feel full, for what filled them was the word. The feast began only after night had fallen, and once a few sips of light wine had been shared, the true game began. The host posed a question just as Socrates once did in Plato's Symposium. What is love? A question as simple as a flower, yet instantly the room became a battlefield of ideas. Each man took his turn to speak. Some said love was the longing for perfection. Others believed it to be an eternal absence, and some praised Eros, the winged god, who, though childlike in form, held the hearts of heroes and poets alike. No one was right, and no one was wrong. The symposium did not seek truth, it sought the awakening of the soul. In a world where mouths are trained only to chew and swallow in Athens, the mouth was also the birthplace of ideas, and the feast was a gathering where empty stomachs met not to eat, but to breathe out something greater than themselves. There is a detail often overlooked. Ancient Greek wine was never drunk pure. It was always diluted with water, usually in ratios of 1 part wine to 3 or even 5 parts water, because they believed that only when reason remained intact could Dionysus, the god of ecstasy, truly enter. To be drunk was considered barbaric, the behavior of Thracians, not of civilized people. The symposium, therefore, was unlike any modern party. It did not chase pleasure. It was the art of keeping pleasure from devouring the soul. Each sip of wine brought the participants one step closer to a state of social meditation where the boundary between reason and emotion was stretched taut, like the strings of a lyre. And from within that tension, knowledge arose. Do you remember the last time you drank with someone and spoke of neither work, nor money, nor drama? In the symposium, such topics had no place. There were only ideas, myths, beauty, and the nature of the soul. Sometimes someone would recite a poem by Sappho, and everyone would fall silent, not from a lack of things to say, but because they were digesting. Not food, but emotion. An American scholar once wrote the symposium was ancient Athens' Facebook, but without pictures, only souls were posted. Humorous, yet accurate. The symposium was the first true social network where people did not share photos of meals, but the meaning of hunger itself. And like all ancient rituals, the symposium included one part unseen: the empty chair. That seat was reserved for no one, for it was where Dionysus might sit at any moment. In the night, in the wine, in the laughter, in the trembling voice of someone recalling their first love, the god of chaos and creation was always present. Had Socrates been born in any other culture, he might have become a madman or a hermit. But it was the symposium, where he neither ate nor gorged, but drank and spoke, that made him an icon. The story he told of Diotima, the mysterious woman who taught him the philosophy of love, was the greatest gift of a night without satiety. Today we invite friends over, turn on Netflix, and order food. We are full, but our words are empty. We toast, but do not meet each other's eyes. We have leftovers, but our souls remain hungry. The real question is not, what are you eating? It is, when you eat, what are you thinking? If you have never eaten in silence or drunk in dialogue, then you have never lived as an ancient Greek. The symposium stands as proof of a culture that understood there are nights when the belly need not be filled, but the heart and the mind must be. Not with meat and fish, but with the kind of questions that do not let you sleep after rising from the table. If you have ever studied mathematics, you know of Pythagoras, the king of the right triangle theorem. But few remember that before becoming a symbol in textbooks, he founded a strange community where everyone was vegetarian, practiced silence, woke at dawn to meditate, and most peculiarly, absolutely avoided touching beans. Not because of allergies, but because of a profound belief that food could influence the soul. Pythagoras believed that eating was not just a physical act, it was a moral one. Those who overate, consumed pungent foods, red meat, or strong alcohol would cloud their souls and become incapable of receiving knowledge. He believed in reincarnation, that the human soul once belonged to animals and would continue this cycle unless purified. And the first step toward purification was not repentance, it was fasting. Within his community, the Pythagoreans' meals were sacred rituals. Each member sat in a precise place in silence, eating in a specific sequence, using only pure ingredients, grains, vegetables, fruits, and clean water. No meat, no onions, and especially no beans. They believed that beans, especially fava beans, could contain the souls of the dead. And when you ate beans, you might be consuming a part of yourself. It sounds superstitious. But behind these strange rituals was a deep philosophy. If you cannot control what enters your body, you cannot control your thoughts. And if the soul is the most precious thing you possess, then the stomach must be treated as a sacred threshold. Pythagoras was not alone. The ancient Greek world was one in which philosophers spent a surprising amount of time thinking about menus. But then a few centuries later came a man who seemed entirely opposite Epicurus. The world has often misunderstood him. People think of him as a pleasure seeker, a hedonist who lived for indulgence. In fact, the word Epicurean later came to describe someone who delights in fine foods and rich wines. But they missed something important. Epicurus lived in a vegetable garden, ate dry bread, drank cold water, and taught that true pleasure was the absence of suffering. A typical day for him went like this: rise early, tend the garden, write letters to friends, eat a very small meal, and dedicate time to philosophy. He once said, "If you no longer crave meat or wine, you have conquered the gods." And in his final letter before dying in physical agony, he wrote, "Though my body is breaking down, my soul is full of pleasure, because I am recalling our philosophical conversations." Epicurus was not against pleasure. but he divided it into two types: natural pleasure, like eating to survive or drinking to quench thirst, and unnecessary pleasure, like luxurious feasting or chasing instant gratification. And he believed that fasting, the right kind of fasting, could lead to a deeper form of joy, freedom. Both Pythagoras and Epicurus, one avoiding beans to protect the soul, the other eating dry bread to cultivate inner peace, believed that hunger was not the enemy. It was a companion, a reminder that you are alive, and that you still have the power to choose not to be led by the stomach. Today, those ancient ideas are making a comeback, wearing the white coats of laboratories. Intermittent fasting is now seen as a biological tool that triggers cellular repair, reduces inflammation, and improves memory. Scientists have discovered that when the body enters a state of mild hunger, it activates AMPK and SIRT1 proteins, often called longevity switches. And in this state, many report that they think more clearly, work more deeply, and feel as alert as a Greek philosopher. What Pythagoras and Epicurus understood over 2,000 years ago without data, just from experience, turns out to be remarkably accurate. There is an old image, Epicurus sitting beneath an olive tree holding a piece of dry bread, his gaze distant. Beside him sits a friend. They are speaking about death, but they are not afraid. Because in that moment, in the light hunger, the simplicity and the friendship, they are living so deeply that there is nothing to regret. We, on the other hand, might live the opposite way, well-fed, digitally connected, abundant in everything except ourselves. We eat to fill the void, only to find that the more we eat, the emptier we feel. Perhaps it is time to reconsider not to eat less just to lose weight, not to fast just for control, but to eat as a philosophical act, as a way to remember that you have a soul and that the empty stomach is the doorway back to it. Imagine a 12-year-old boy living in ancient Athens. He has no iPad, no snacks, no school bus. Instead, he wakes at dawn, splashes his face with cold water, eats a piece of dry bread dipped in olive oil, and walks through stone-paved streets to the gymnasium, where both body and soul are trained together. In that world, he does not simply learn to read, write, and think philosophically. He also learns how to be hungry seriously and with discipline. In surviving historical records, we find descriptions of the diet for Athenian youths: no meat, no sugar, no milk, only barley, goat, cheese, dried figs, olives, and occasionally salted fish. Small portions. Repetitive. Dry. But this was not due to poverty. It stemmed from a deep belief that when the stomach takes up less space, the mind has room to grow. To the Greeks, education did not begin with books. It began with habit. Before a child could reason, he had to learn to sit still while hungry. Before understanding beauty, he had to know that taste was not something to be pursued. Because if he could not resist the call of his belly, how could he possibly resist the call of the crowd? At the gymnasium, boys were trained physically, but not to build muscle. They ran through discs, wrestled on only one modest meal a day. In that state of scarcity, they learned restraint. And from restraint, they cultivated the most essential quality of an Athenian citizen's sophrosin, moderation. This was not hypocrisy. It was a life strategy. Whoever could control hunger could also control desire, fear, and even anger. Children were not disciplined through punishment, but through the very architecture of daily life, deliberate simplicity, structured deprivation, and conversations about the meaning of freedom. There is an image painted on an ancient ceramic vase, a boy offering a small cake to his teacher. Not as a gift, but to ask the teacher to hold it for him as a way of saying, "Master, today I want to learn self-restraint." In that culture, refusing a meal was an intellectual gesture. Far from modern thinking, where children are encouraged to eat, well, eat more to grow and never go hungry, the ancient Athenians taught their children that the body was not the center of life, but a tool to shape the spirit. They did not reject physical pleasure, but they drew boundaries. They taught that without limits, pleasure becomes a chain. And the first most visible limit was the amount of food on the table. Strangely enough, within this simplicity, the boys developed extraordinary abilities in debate memory and creativity. They needed no caffeine, no supplements. What they needed was space. And sometimes that space began with an empty stomach. Modern science is beginning to confirm this: children who consume less sugar, fewer processed foods, and fewer snacks tend to concentrate longer, sleep better, and exhibit better emotional regulation. But the Greeks did not need data, they saw the results across generations. A society that needed few police officers because every child was taught self-regulation before they even knew how to argue. You might think this was extreme, but look at the lives of children today. They have everything balanced: nutrition, customized menus, endless options, yet they lack the habit of waiting. And if you cannot wait, you cannot learn. Ancient Athens understood this intuitively, and so they designed childhood as a lesson in delay, in finding ease within scarcity, and in discovering joy not from food, but from understanding. One of the youngest philosophers of that era, named Antisthenes, a student of Socrates, once said, "I first learned philosophy through hunger. It made me listen better." It sounds like a joke. But in a world where even the sound of a growling stomach was considered part of education, it was a truth. Today, we try to make children full, happy, and smart by giving them more calories, more information. But the Greeks taught theirs by taking things away: less food, less comfort, fewer instant rewards, so that what remained could grow willpower. The Athenian boy steps out of the gymnasium at sunset. He is tired, hungry, his hands dusty. But he carries something that no meal can give: the belief that he can master himself. Before there were doctors in white coats, before there were hospitals, imaging machines, or painkillers, there was a bearded man who lived on the island of Kos, walking from village to village, carrying no medicine, only parsley, vinegar, barley, porridge, and a few rolls of handwritten waxed paper. His name was Hippocrates, and for him, medicine did not begin with illness. It began with the stomach. In the vast collection of over 60 texts attributed to him and his students, known as the Corpus Hippocraticum, nearly a third focus on diet. There were no antibiotics, no MRI scans, no emergency rooms. But there was one unwavering principle: let food be thy medicine, and medicine be thy food. That was not a slogan. It was how he healed. When someone had a fever, Hippocrates did not prescribe pills. He asked, "What did you eat yesterday?" When someone had a headache, he did not check their blood pressure. He studied the skin tone, the eyes, and recommended fasting for 24 hours. When someone was exhausted, he did not put them to bed. He told them to go for a walk, then eat thin porridge mixed with vinegar and honey. Hippocrates did not believe disease was a curse from the gods or a stroke of bad luck. He believed it was the result of imbalance between basic elements: hot and cold, dry and moist, black bile and yellow bile. And the most disruptive force in that internal ecosystem was how we eat. One of his students recorded a moment when Hippocrates saved a dying man suffering from stomach pain, not with medicine, but by ordering a 3-day fast allowing only barley water, then slowly reintroducing goat cheese and figs. Within a week, the man had recovered his body, revitalized his spirit, clear and luminous. For Hippocrates, the stomach was not where digestion ended, it was where thinking began. He believed that all illness was connected to the gut, and every true remedy began at the table. Imagine you walk into a room in the 5th century before Christ. On the table there is no stethoscope, no syringe. There is only a bowl of warm barley porridge, a few mint leaves, a cup of vinegar mixed with warm water, and a man asking you, "When was the last time you walked under the sunlight?" That was what a medical consultation looked like in ancient Greece. And in that moment you were not just being cured, you were being returned to yourself. Strangely, we are circling back to where Hippocrates once stood. Modern medicine is beginning to recognize that chronic diseases from diabetes and depression to Alzheimer's often trace back to inflammation, to a disrupted gut microbiome, to a lifestyle misaligned with nature. And the solution is not just medication, but right eating. The ancient Greeks had a dish called kykeon, a mixture of barley water vinegar sometimes infused with herbs. It was not delicious, but it was cleansing. Not the kind of detox you see advertised online, but a rebalancing from the inside out. Hippocrates believed people did not just fall ill from viruses or accidents, but from living out of sync with the rhythms of the universe. Eating too late, eating too much, eating without thought. These, he believed, were the true roots of suffering. He often taught that if you feel drowsy after eating, that meal has not nourished your soul. If you need coffee to stay awake, then your breakfast is working against your body. And if you never truly feel hunger, then you may never truly know what you need. To him, hunger was a compass. A stomach ache was a signal, and food taken at the right time could heal even invisible wounds. In one ancient passage he wrote, "He who does not know why he eats cannot know why he lives." It sounds more like a philosopher than a physician, but that was the point. He was both. Today, you may not need Hippocrates to treat your illness, but if one day your mind feels heavy, your emotions clouded your body, sluggish, perhaps what you need is not medicine, but a bowl of barley porridge, a sip of vinegar, and a quiet moment to listen again to the voice of your stomach. The belly, as Hippocrates believed, is where the soul sends its letters. And if you can no longer hear them, it may be because you have eaten too much to listen. That morning in the cold stone chamber of an Athenian prison, Socrates awoke. He was 70 years old, about to die. But there were no wails, no sighs, no tearful hands clutching his own. Only his friends sat quietly around him and a bowl of warm barley porridge. It was his final meal. No wine, no meat, no ceremony. Just a few spoonfuls of porridge to keep the body alert until the very last moment. A soldier entered holding a cup of poison hemlock extracted from the deadly plant, a liquid that would slowly numb the body rising from the legs to the heart. A death in silence, a classical death noble and composed, a philosophical death. Socrates accepted the cup as one might receive a gift. He did not tremble. Before drinking, he thanked the soldier, "Thank you for this gift." Then he turned to his disciples and said, "We owe a rooster to Asclepius, the god of healing." His final words were a metaphor. He viewed death as a form of healing, a release from the body, a shedding of its heavy shell so the soul could be weightless. And in that moment, there was nothing tragic, only clarity like the solution to a mathematical equation. But take notice, before death, he still ate. Not to prolong life, but to remain conscious. In Greek philosophy, a beautiful death is a conscious death. Not hazy, not panicked, not agonized. And to sustain that awareness, the body must be strong enough, grounded enough, lucid enough. In Phaedo, one of the most moving philosophical texts ever written, Plato describes his teacher's death like a slow symphony. Socrates continued speaking with his students until his legs went numb. He kept questioning, kept debating, kept teasing death as though it were just another fascinating topic at a late-night dinner. As the chill reached his chest, he said, This body is no longer me. Then he closed his eyes. No screaming, no fear, no regret. We can live our entire lives without ever thinking about death until it arrives. And when it does, we panic, plead, scream in delirium. But Socrates was different. He ate to keep his body steady so that death would not be a descent into chaos, but the precise final note of a well-considered life. That may send a shiver through you. But the ancient Greeks did not fear death as we do. To them, death was not the end, it was what remained after a meal had been fully digested. And the goal was not to extend life, but to die properly. Today, medicine may give you 10 extra years spent unconscious with tubes and sedatives. But Socrates did not need more years. He needed one more minute of clarity to finish the story he was telling. And he did so among friends, among ideas, with a strange and graceful stillness. That poisoned cup held not only death, it held an entire worldview. One in which people did not eat to prolong existence, but to live deeply and die beautifully. You might ask, what does that mean for us in a world of Uber Eats emergency rooms and life extended at all costs? But perhaps the answer is not in the hospital. It is in the kitchen. Try just once to eat in silence. No screens, no notifications, no background noise. Just you and the meal and your breath. In that moment, you may hear what Socrates once heard, the echo of the soul reminding you that no one lives forever. And that is precisely why every meal is a ritual of life. A modern thinker once said, death is not the worst thing. Living without knowing you are alive, that is the true horror. And Socrates, in the way he ate and died, reminds us that awareness is the most sacred thing of all. We eat to survive. But sometimes eating can also be a way to touch immortality if we eat as though this were the final meal and every word that follows might be the last. If you have ever knelt before a meal to pray, you are participating in one of the oldest human acts, transforming eating into ritual. But if you were an ancient Greek, it did not stop at a prayer, it was an entire system of mythology ritual, and the belief that every bite was part of a divine universe. Before sowing the first barley of the season, Athenian farmers did more than prepare the soil. They offered gifts to Demeter, the goddess of harvest, a sprig of grain, a few figs, a bit of honey, and a short hymn read by candlelight. They believed that without Demeter's blessing, no seed would sprout, no matter how fertile the land. In that civilization, eating was not merely a human right, it was a divine privilege. People did not simply know hunger, they knew gratitude. And that gratitude was not abstract. It was woven into a web of festivals, sacrifices, and stories. One of the grandest celebrations was the Eleusinian Mysteries' secret rites honoring Demeter and Persephone held annually. For several days, Athenians from slaves to nobles fasted, walked 13 miles from Athens to Eleusis, bathed in seawater, and kept complete silence. They were given a sacred drink, kykeon, made of fermented barley mint vinegar and water. No one ever revealed what happened inside the temple. But all who emerged agreed after experiencing it, they no longer feared death. This is what made ancient Greek cuisine so unique. Every dish carried a sacred meaning. A flatbread symbolized the sun. An olive was a gift from Athena. A bowl of warm porridge stood for the rebirth of life. They ate as though speaking to the gods. The Greeks also believed that some foods were not meant for mortals. Wine, for instance, was a gift from Dionysus, the god of ecstasy, madness, and creation. But if consumed improperly, undiluted, without moderation, it was considered an insult to the god. And the consequence was not just a headache. It was a severance from divine order. At public feasts, there was always a portion reserved for the gods, a few drops of wine poured onto the earth, a piece of bread cast into the fire. Not because the gods were hungry, but because humans needed to remember they were not the center of the universe. There is a famous story: a man too arrogant dared to eat the sacred roasted meat before offering it at Zeus's altar. He was struck by lightning. To modern eyes, this seems superstitious, but to the Greeks, it was the collapse of balance. To eat incorrectly was to disturb the cosmos. The beauty of how the Greeks ate was that they always ate with someone, be it friends, lovers, or the divine. They did not eat alone. For to eat alone was to eat like a beast. And humans were beings who knew how to share, how to give thanks, how to lift a cup, and retell ancient myths. Imagine yourself seated on a hillside during the festival of Panathenaea. Under torchlight, hundreds dine together, pieces of bread, slices of cheese, a few figs. No one eats much, yet everyone feels full because what is being digested is not only food, but stories, memories, and connection. Today, we live surrounded by 24/7 supermarkets, packaged meals, deliveries in 15 minutes. Yet we have perhaps never felt truly full in the ancient Greek sense. For fullness to them meant the soul being recognized as part of the grand cosmos. They taught their children through stories about the goddess of grain being kidnapped, about winter arriving from Demeter's sorrow, about Persephone eating 6 pomegranate seeds and staying in the underworld for 6 months each year. These tales were not bedtime stories. They were spiritual maps, teaching that nature has laws, and eating is how humans harmonize with them. When you raise a glass of wine, when you break a piece of bread, when you pause in silence before a meal, you may be enacting something older than religion itself, turning a physical act into a sacred moment. The ancient Greeks did not need many dishes. They only needed to remember that each one held meaning, and that meaning, if chewed slowly, could help you digest a whole life. Morning. You open your eyes. What greets you is not sunlight, but phone notifications. You pull up the blanket, scroll through messages, emails, and by a habit as automated as breathing, you eat. Not because you are hungry, but because it is time. A slice of sandwich bread, a cup of coffee, a bowl of cereal. Food is consumed like fuel at a gas station, eating while watching clips, chewing while scrolling, absorbing calories while burning through attention. You are not eating, you are consuming. For more than 2,000 years, humanity evolved from eating to survive to eating to contemplate. And now we are back to eating to forget. We live in abundance homes, filled with food tables, packed with drinks, supermarkets open all night. Yet the soul remains hungry. And the most paradoxical truth is this: the more we eat, the emptier we feel. The ancient Greeks would look at your breakfast and quietly walk away. Not out of contempt, but because they simply could not comprehend it. How could a conscious being eat without being present? They once lived in material scarcity, but overflowed with meaning. We, on the other hand, are so full that a meal is no longer an act. It is merely the buffer between 2 emails. We have everything except presence. And that presence, strangely enough, begins with the stomach. When Socrates fasted to think, when Pythagoras chose vegetables to keep the soul pure, when Epicurus found deep joy in dry bread, when Athenian children learned to be hungry in order to learn how to be human, they all understood that eating was never the goal. It was the test. A test to see if you are the master or the servant. A test to know whether you are alive or merely racing through time. A test to find out whether you can sit and just eat without needing any other stimulation. Today we eat to feel okay, but the ancient Greeks ate to feel alive within a greater order. They ate as if listening to the cosmos. We eat in the noise of vacuum cleaners and 8-second TikTok videos. We forget that eating can be a doorway back to ourselves. That is the final thought this series wishes to leave behind. Not for you to eat like an ancient Greek, but to reconsider how you eat as a mirror reflecting your life. When you eat, who are you eating with? When you eat, do you know what you are eating? When you eat, do you think of the rice grower, the rainstorm, the hands that kneaded the dough? When you eat, are you connecting or are you escaping? Among all human behaviors, eating is the one thing we do every day. But very few turn it into a ritual. Even fewer turn it into a philosophy. You do not need to do anything grand. Just once eat slowly. No music, no phone, no rush. And if you become quiet enough, perhaps, you will hear it. Not the sound of your stomach, but a voice from deep within, a place where each bite becomes the expression of a life truly worth living. In that moment, you will not merely be full, you will be nourished. December 1974. A civilian airplane designated TWA Flight 514 plunged directly into the Blue Ridge Mountains in Virginia. All 92 people on board perished instantly. But what was strange was that when local firefighters reached the scene, they were turned away. An armed barricade had already been set up. Not police, not rescue crews, but men without name tags who refused to answer questions and disappeared afterward as if they had never existed. Locals called it Mount Weather. But to the U.S. government, this place was far more than just a mountain. It was a survival key, a sanctuary where only the most select few would be allowed to survive, if the apocalypse ever came. From above, Mount Weather looks like nothing more than a green-covered hill. No signs, no welcome gates, just an anonymous lump of land in the quiet Virginia countryside. Yet beneath its surface lies a different world, an unseen city, a second government that no one elected, a kind of black box for America locked away until the rest of the nation turns to ash. The scariest part, it did not just appear, it was prepared, long ago. For decades, the federal government quietly built a network of secret bunkers, not to safeguard the people, but to safeguard the government. Leaders. Mount Weather stands at the center, a fortified complex deep underground with modern infrastructure, an operations room, broadcast station, hospital dormitories, air filtration systems against radiation. Put simply, this is Washington, D.C. underground. No sunlight, no press, no elections, but enough power to run a replacement America. Many dismissed it as urban legend. But the whispers felt more real on September 11, 2001. When America was under attack, hundreds of government officials were urgently evacuated to secret facilities. Among them, Mount Weather. In that moment, what had been called absurd flickered to life. People descended into that mountain, and a multi-ton steel door shut behind them, sealing them off from the burning world outside. The question is, what did they find inside? Nobody knows for sure. What's publicly available is just the tip of the iceberg, a few leaked photos, some redacted reports. But those who've worked near the facility tell chilling tales. An anonymous engineer says he once saw a survival zoning map with markings for who was allowed in and who wasn't. A retired firefighter spoke of secret military convoys driving into the mountain at night, carrying unopenable crates. And a media technician detected underground radio signals untraceable on frequencies never part of any civilian network. Mount Weather is not merely a shelter, it is a command center. A place from which the government could restart if the rest of the country collapses. But the truly terrifying part lies in the list. A list of names who would be summoned to Mount Weather when the end comes. No actors, no nurses, no construction workers. Not you, not me, only top leaders. Military commanders, key figures in media, the economy, and security. Those who will keep America alive on terms decided only by them. In a nuclear war scenario, even the president might not survive. Secret successors pre-assigned don't require public swearing in, not chosen by voters. But when the clock hits zero, they become the legal government, and they are at Mount Weather. This brings a horrifying paradox. Has America built a democracy? That does not depend on the people. If there is a room underground where powerful figures await the end to run a new nation, then what are we, the people, on the surface? The truth is, you will not get the call. You will not be saved. Because Mount Weather was not built for you. It was built for those who believe that when everything falls apart, they will be the first to rise. And now we have merely tapped on that steel door. Behind it lies a labyrinth of power, fear, and decisions nobody knows. But the strangest part, Mount Weather, is still active. And no one has ever walked out to tell us what happened inside. The question is not, does it exist, but what day is it waiting to spring into action? No one knows exactly when Mount Weather first began construction. But declassified documents reveal that as early as the 1950s, at the height of nuclear war paranoia, the U.S. government was urgently setting up Doomsday facilities. And Mount Weather was the very first brick laid. Not the Pentagon, not the White House. It was this, an anonymous mountain in Virginia, that was chosen as the command center if America were to be wiped off the map. Why? Because it was high. Because it was stable. Because it was close enough to Washington, D.C. to stay connected, but far enough to avoid the radioactive fallout of a direct nuclear strike. And because it could hide an entire underground city without anyone ever knowing. Mount Weather is not just a shelter. It is a full-scale replica of the National Command System. An underground Washington, D.C. buried beneath hundreds of feet, or over 100 meters of solid rock and dirt surrounded by steel fences, thermal cameras, and military-grade radar. No signage, no windows, but inside a world that never sleeps. According to reports once published by FEMA, Mount Weather contains everything. Cabinet meeting rooms, a national communications hub, housing quarters for hundreds of federal officials, and even its own private helicopter landing pad perched on the mountain's summit. Below ground lie reinforced tunnels, electrical systems, water filtration networks, and even an emergency broadcasting station designed to send orders to the American people in the event of a national attack. But you will never hear that message, because if it is ever broadcast, it means the rest of America is already gone. Mount Weather is built to function like a living organism. If Washington falls, the nervous system of the nation still fires signals from beneath the earth. But the terror lies not in the structure, it lies in the philosophy. A philosophy never voted on by citizens, never debated in Congress, but quietly upheld for over 70 years. If the world ends, only a select few have the right to survive and lead what remains. The government calls it continuity of government. It sounds noble, but look closer. It is not about continuity of society, not about saving the people. It is about continuity of power, continuity of control, keeping the name, the United States of America, alive, even if no one is left to speak it but them. There is a list. It is not public. It changes with each administration, with each policy shift, and possibly with each show of loyalty. On that list are those allowed to evacuate to Mount Weather in case of a nuclear war. The president, the vice president, congressional leaders, high-ranking officials from FEMA, the CIA, and the NSA. Central bank directors, communications coordinators, national health experts. They will be summoned. They will be flown in by military aircraft, armored convoys, or airlifted straight into the mountain. You will not. If you live in Washington, D.C., you may have seen black SUVs driving with no headlights in the dead of night, gliding like ghosts along Route 267, the highway connecting the capital to the mountain. Gray helicopters with no tail numbers sometimes vanish into the Appalachian mist. No one says where they go, but everyone knows. One resident of nearby Berryville once said, "I saw a convoy enter the mountain at 3 in the morning." After that, there was total silence. No cell signal, no news. And then everything returned to normal, like nothing had happened. A journalist once tried to approach Mount Weather. He was stopped 2 miles or about 3 kilometers from the main gate by an unmarked checkpoint. No one would say which agency they worked for. No papers, no threats, just 5 words. You need to turn around. All of it paints a picture of something that sleeps but never rests, like a beast made of steel and concrete waiting to be awakened. But Mount Weather is not just a place. It is a concept, a symbol of how power decides who gets to live and who gets left behind. It raises a painful question. In the face of apocalypse, is the society we live in truly equal? This is a nation built on the ideals of freedom, democracy, and fairness. Yet it has quietly constructed a city for the day it all collapses. A city where not everyone gets a key. A city with no ballots, no voices, only orders. In an emergency, Mount Weather will not broadcast a plea for help. It will send commands. And whatever remains of the country, if anything, is expected to listen, but never respond. And that is what makes it the most terrifying place in America. Not because it kills, but because it decides who gets to survive. And so it waits. No noise, no lights, no names called. But the list is written. The doors are ready to shut. And you are still outside. The government calls it continuity of government, a term that sounds harmless, even noble. An emergency plan meant to ensure the country does not fall into chaos if Washington is ever destroyed. But that is just the name on the surface. Behind it lies a hidden system designed to function without democracy, without Congress, and without your consent. This mechanism began at the height of the Cold War, when the threat of Soviet nuclear missiles hung like a blade over every major American city. The White House understood one thing: if just a single intercontinental missile ever hit U.S. soil, Washington, D.C. would be the first to vanish. But what was more terrifying, the government was not willing to lose power, not even for a minute. And so they began building a Plan B. A shadow government, one without elections, without debate, just orders, and a succession list. Sound like a conspiracy it once was, until the truth started to leak. In 1987, during a shocking congressional hearing, White House advisor Oliver North was questioned on a secret plan known as Rex 84. The plan allowed the government to temporarily suspend the Constitution, declare martial law, and control the press if a national emergency broke out. And yes, it was connected to Mount Weather. From that moment, people began piecing the clues together, and the picture that emerged was colder than any nuclear winter. Beneath the surface of America, a parallel political structure has existed, one that does not need votes, one that never holds press briefings. It simply waits for a triggering signal and then activates like a body trained for decades. They call it continuity government. It has its own order of succession. If the president dies, no problem. The vice president takes over. If both are lost, still covered. The Speaker of the House steps in. But if the entire line of command is wiped out, Mount Weather already has a list of emergency successor officials. These people do not need to be publicly known. In fact, many do not even know they are on the list until a helicopter lands outside their house at 3:00 in the morning. They are taken into the mountain and become the United States government. Sounds like a political thriller, but in 2001, this very plan was activated in the wake of the September 11th attacks. While the nation reeled from the collapse of the Twin Towers, hundreds of high-ranking officials were secretly evacuated to Mount Weather and other similar sites. A second temporary government was set up underground. It lasted only a few days. But it proved one thing: the machine is real, and it works. Strangely, in one of the most urgent moments in American history, no votes were cast. No one asked the people. No debates aired on television. Everything happened in silence, precise, efficient, and completely hidden. But what is the cost of that efficiency? One lawmaker once said, "We built an entire government for the end of the world, but forgot to ask, will it still be America?" Because democracy by nature requires people. It needs disagreement. It needs argument. But Mount Weather has no time for any of that. It is a place for decisions, for orders, for bare survival, just enough to keep the system from shutting down. A system that does not need to be loved, only continued. And a painful question begins to emerge: if the country is erased and only a small group survives to restore order, do they still represent the people? Or are they just the winners of a game that was rigged from the start? The government will never tell you. But one small, chilling detail lies buried in FEMA's documentation. If all of Washington is destroyed and no one from the official succession line survives, a tiny group known as the Continuity Political Unit will take over. They do not need to be disclosed. They are not required to be vetted. And they hold full authority to create new laws in the dark beneath the earth, while the world outside lies in ashes. A journalist once asked a senior official, "Do you believe a government without the people can still be legitimate?" The man looked at him, smiled faintly, and said, "It is better than nothing." Mount Weather does not grant interviews. It does not have a loudspeaker system, but it does have 1-meter-thick concrete walls, a 13-ton steel door, an independent power grid, its own water supply, satellite communication systems, and hundreds of beds with names already assigned. And it does not need you to function. In an age where everyone believes they have the right to know, Mount Weather is a slap in the face to that illusion. It reminds us there are machines of power that do not need light to live, that do not need applause to exist, only silence and the right moment. You can call it responsibility or conspiracy, but truth is colder than either. And when that day comes, when satellites go dark, radio waves turn strange, and the sky shifts to gray, perhaps a voice will echo from somewhere unknown. The new president has taken office, in the dark, inside the mountain. No one elected them. No one objected. It was just the order already prepared. Mount Weather does not stand alone. It is just one link, one critical node in a survival network that the U.S. government has quietly constructed over decades. A second America. One that does not appear on maps, one with no zip codes, but with enough infrastructure to replace the entire governing system if ever needed. And what is truly staggering, it stretches across the entire country. Imagine you are looking at a map, not a road map, not a political one, but a top-secret blueprint marked with survival points known only to a select few. Every tiny dot on that map represents a hidden base, underground bunkers, command centers, emergency broadcasting sites. Many are tucked beneath mountain ranges. Many are right below the very cities you live in. You walk over them every day without realizing it. You may be standing directly above one right now, unaware that with a single command, it would transform into the control hub for a brand new world. In Pennsylvania, there is the Raven Rock Mountain Complex, nicknamed the Second Pentagon. A fortress carved deep into rock capable of housing thousands, equipped with an independent communication system. Its main blast door weighs 30 tons or about 27 metric tons and can withstand a direct nuclear hit. Inside are military control rooms, medical facilities, dormitories, even a barbershop. In Colorado, you will find the Cheyenne Mountain Complex, once the command center of NORAD, tracking every missile launch on Earth. It was built between two layers of solid granite shielded from shock waves, chemical, biological, and electromagnetic attacks. During the Cold War, it was the only place in America designed to keep functioning, even if the world outside had burned to ashes. In West Virginia, there is the Greenbrier Bunker. Beneath a luxurious hotel lies a vast underground complex stretching hundreds of meters or over 1,000 feet, originally built to house the entire U.S. Congress if Washington were attacked. It includes meeting rooms, communications networks, and even a mock press room where the surviving lawmakers could deliver statements to a nation that might not even exist anymore. And then there are the nameless places. No records, no mention in any public report. These are called gray sites, known only to a handful of people, built in remote regions on private property, or beneath seemingly ordinary buildings, post offices, warehouses, data centers. But they all have one thing in common: they are connected by signal. In 1996, it was discovered that the U.S. government operates a secret emergency radio network known as the Mount Weather Emergency Network. A series of antennas, satellites, and transmitters only activated if the entire civilian system collapses. In that moment, the voice you hear on the radio will not be your usual host. It will be a command from somewhere like Mount Weather. Shelter in place. The government is still operating. No one knows who the speaker is. No one knows where the command originates. All they know is that it would be the last message you ever hear if Doomsday arrives. Some researchers call this a map of control through chaos. Every facility is an anchor point, meant to prevent total collapse of national order. But whose order defined by whom and rewritten by which hands? Because in all the planning designed to preserve government, there is almost no mention of civilians, no public shelters for millions, no standardized evacuation program, only plans for key individuals, engineers, scientists, leaders, military commanders, policy architects, those who would rebuild the nation. But who would they lead? That question becomes more bitter when you examine the budgets. Billions of dollars have been poured into elite shelter systems, while most regular citizens are simply encouraged to be prepared. You are told to have a survival kit. You are told to store clean water. You are told to keep a hand crank radio. But no one tells you that you have the right to survive. Because they know you are not on the list. They will not say that. They will use terms like strategic priority, national security, and efficiency maximization. But really, it is just a modern version of selection. A high-tech Noah's Ark where only those holding keys are allowed on board. And that ark is buried deep in the ground. Some have called these bunkers a network of hell, because to maintain them, an alternate version of America had to be created, one without democracy, without transparency, without human rights, only power and survival. And the strangest thing is you cannot access that map. It does not show up on Google. It is not stored in the Library of Congress. It is held in the hands of a very small group people who, if you ever knew their names, would change the access codes. They do not want you at Mount Weather. They do not want you finding Raven Rock. They do not want you to know what lies beneath Greenbrier. They want one thing for you not to ask. Do not knock on the door uninvited. Do not survive if you are not in the plan. Because the map is already drawn. The keys have already been handed out. And the bunker doors have already been oiled, waiting to close. Imagine this a morning with no warning. No sirens, no messages. Just a strange, deafening silence. And then the signal vanishes. The television turns to static. The radio buzzes with noise. Your phone cannot connect. Military helicopters roar overhead. And outside your window in the distance, a mushroom cloud slowly rises into the sky. What would you do? Run, hide, call your family. Search for a shelter. You have nowhere to go. No one is coming to help. And then, you suddenly remember you once heard about a place called Mount Weather. But the moment you think of it, the door has already shut, because the list was called long ago. And you are not on it. The most heartbreaking truth about Mount Weather is not in its technology, not in its 1-meter-thick steel doors, not in its radiation-proof air filtration system. It lies in the coldness of selection. It lies in the names etched into the walls deep inside that mountain. Because Mount Weather was not built for 330 million people. It was built for a few hundred. There are no tickets, no reservations, no cameras, no explanations. Just one requirement: you must be important. Important by the government's definition. Important enough that the survival of the nation is said to depend on your continued existence. Not a nurse, not a teacher, not a firefighter, not you. A former FEMA employee once admitted, "We had a classification board. Level A was high-ranking politicians. Level B was strategic leadership. Level C was technical support. Civilians, there was no level." Did you catch that? No level. There is a story few have heard on television. On September 11, 2001, as the United States spiraled into chaos, dozens of officials were evacuated. Among them was a woman, an entry-level communications officer working in Washington. She received an evacuation order, but no one came to pick her up. She drove herself to the assembly point. When she arrived at the gate of Mount Weather, she was stopped by soldiers. "Your name is not on the list. I work for the government. We know. But you are not authorized to enter. I have a security badge. That means nothing." That woman, though a public servant, though part of the system, was left outside the gates of the so-called safe zone. She recalled, "I stood there and watched the convoys roll in. The steel doors closed, and I knew. If that had been the end of the world, I would have died in the parking lot." The bigger question is, who gets chosen? The even bigger question, who gets to choose? Because importance in the Mount Weather model does not come from public service or contribution or moral character. It comes from title connections, and sometimes pure chance within a bureaucratic chain. A brilliant civil engineer might be left behind. A junior assistant at the Department of the Interior might get in. An emergency medical technician might have no space. But a radio broadcaster could be saved because someone has to read the announcements. Do you see the paradox? A nation that claims liberty and justice for all, but in its most critical moment, silently splits itself in two: those who will live and those who will be left behind. And you will not be called. No one will send you a code. No one will drive to your house. No one will check if you are alive. They will broadcast a signal. They will say the government is in control, but in truth, they are only controlling who remains on the board. The most painful part is not being left behind. It is being left behind by a system you believed was yours. You pay your taxes. You cast your vote. You sing the anthem on Independence Day. You stand when the flag is raised. But when the world ends, you have no seat on the lifeboat. Mount Weather, Cheyenne Mountain, Raven Rock. They have no back doors, no side entrances, no just-in-time arrivals. There is a lockdown protocol. There is an automated seal. And once that door closes, it will never open again. Many call it the cost of efficiency. That, in an emergency, not everyone can be saved. That priority must be given to those who can run the country. But no one dares to say aloud, this is no longer democracy. This is selective survival where dignity, morality, and loyalty have no currency. Only rank does. And if you are not in the right place, you will not be called. You could be standing right at the bunker's edge. You could scream the name of someone you love who made it inside. You could pound the steel until your hands bleed. But behind that door, no one answers. Not because they cannot hear you, but because they have been instructed, do not open it. Not for anyone. Not for any reason. Because the plan is in motion, and you are not part of it. If you were to walk to the top of Mount Weather on a clear, sunny day, what would you see? A peaceful forest, a steel fence like an old military outpost, a road leading into nothing with no signs to guide you, no sirens, no flags, no hint that this place is the secret heart of America on the day the world ends. But beneath that ground, a machine is still waiting to be activated, a city without people, a government without elections, a nation that does not require consent. Mount Weather is America's black box, not just because it stores what is left of a democracy if the world collapses, but because it records every decision no one is allowed to know. This black box is not strapped to an airplane. It is not opened after a crash. It is not meant for investigation. It is built for replacement. To replace government. To replace law. To replace even the idea of freedom with a new one: survival efficiency. And perhaps the most terrifying thing is it works without us, without society. Mount Weather and similar bases do not exist to save America. They exist to ensure that America never powers down, even if no one is left alive to call it home. Imagine this. One day, every city is flattened. Every television signal goes dead. There are no more gas stations, no more supermarkets, no more internet. But underground, the lights are still on. Fingers still type on keyboards. Voices still debate strategy. Not to save anyone, but to keep the engine of power running. Not because it is humane, but because it does not know how to stop. Mount Weather has no human face. It does not love. It does not cry. It does not regret. It simply executes a program written decades ago: if A happens, then activate B. If B activates, then C survives. There is no place for the question, should we only the command execute? And so it continues like a cold, mechanical soundtrack for the apocalypse. You might ask, why build something like this? The answer is very American, just in case. We live in a country born from fear, fear of invasion, fear of war, fear of terrorism, fear of losing control. And from that fear, an underground world was built quietly, without invitation, without witness. It is like an inverted dream of Thomas Jefferson. Not a government of the people, by the people, for the people, but a government that keeps its distance from the people, operates without the people, and if necessary, continues without anyone ever knowing. In every Hollywood doomsday film, we see a group of survivors fighting together, sacrificing, protecting one another. But in Mount Weather's script, there is no such scene. No group, no community, no humanity, only a list. And that list is never made public. It is updated regularly, encrypted, forever hidden like promises never meant to be kept. Some say this is necessary, that if the end comes, chaos cannot be allowed to speak, that someone must have the authority to rebuild. But rebuild for whom? If only the people on the list survive, then whose country are they rebuilding? If you are not on that list, are you still part of America? Maybe you think you do not need Mount Weather. You will survive on your own. You will plant vegetables, dig a shelter, raise chickens, keep a radio. But what will your radio play? The only signal you will hear will come from Mount Weather. A cold, anonymous voice. The United States government is still operational, but you know it is not the government you once elected. One day the gates will open again, but stepping out of the mountain will not be heroes, not doctors, not parents, not soldiers. It will be officials with briefcases, with orders, with passcodes. They will declare the restoration of order, the restoration of America. But is that still the America we once knew? Or just a shadow version where everything has been predetermined, where the list has sealed the fate of millions in silence? Mount Weather is not a location. It is an idea. A model for a post-human world where people are replaced by roles, emotions are replaced by functions, and memory is replaced by access codes. It is where America, in its fear of collapse, chose to survive, without a soul. And perhaps the scariest truth is not that Mount Weather exists, but that it never needed you to exist. Because America's black box is still running, underground, untouched, unquestioned. And when that day comes, the box will open, not to explain, but to command.